Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where in the country you are. My name is Glenn Anstead. I'm sitting here with Bill Rossello from Greenhouse Consulting, and we're going to talk a little bit today about managing growth in your government contracting business. Thank you all for joining us. You're all on mute for right now during the course of the presentation. If you have any questions at all, please use the chat function. You'll find that on the little toolbar on your right-hand side, and you can type your question that you might have. Or actually, there's a question section, so type that if you have any questions, and we'll answer those questions as they come in. And so without further ado, thank you all for joining today, and hopefully you come out with some key tips, tricks, or strategies to help you grow your government contracting business. So the agenda for today is talking about, the overview. Who is RAFA? Who is Greenhouse Consulting? We're going to talk about the growth conundrums that are out there. What happens if you make it? So as a CEO or a C-level, as an owner or a partner of an organization, you want to grow your business. That's the reason you started it. That's the reason you're feeding it. What happens if you make it? What do you need to do at that point? We're going to talk about infrastructure investment and what that means and how that is involved in growing your business. We're going to have time for question and answers. We really would like, it says here, type your questions in the chat queue. I'll put them into the questions because I think that's a more effective way of dealing with them. And then as your questions come in, we'll be glad to answer them. We don't have a huge crowd here today, so that we're going to try to provide as much interaction as we can through the questions, through our responses, and providing you information. So first, a little bit about RAFA. Who is RAFA? RAFA is a large technology consulting firm based in Washington, D.C., offices in Rockville, Maryland. We do a lot of technology, audit, tax, managed accounting services. I'm not going to read the whole slide. You can see the slide here. We're focused on organizations that give back, that have a social responsibility to the community they're in. Some government contractors, we have some federally funded nonprofits, a lot of organizations that are in the international development arena.
Yeah, hi, my name is Bill Rossello. I'm the managing partner of Greenhouse Consulting, so also want to extend my thanks for joining us today. Greenhouse is a Washington, D.C. based management consulting firm. We work with companies from about 5 or 10 million in revenue up to 400, 450 million. And primarily, we're working to help our clients in 4 ways. One is to develop growth strategies, particularly at key inflection points in the company's development and evolution. Second is helping them execute projects that emanate from those strategies. So a strategy is just a strategy and you got to execute it. So usually that breaks down into component projects, and we help our clients manage through those. And as we're doing it, help them maintain momentum, which is an easy thing to lose in a smaller business with so much going on every day. And then finally, we help our clients manage through the inevitable challenges that are presented by rapid growth. And we'll talk a lot about that today. About 80% of our business is with government contractors. Both my partner, Steve Pimpo, and I have spent quite a number of years in and around the government contracting business, mostly working for the big firms, KPMG, Deloitte, Accenture, and a firm that was acquired by Deloitte called Berry Point. So let's get right into it. We call this the growth conundrum, and it's represented by this S curve, and it's a riddle. such a common story. Entrepreneurs start a business, and it may be a set-aside business. It might be 8A or woman-owned or both, or maybe it's an SDV, OSB. But in any event, the company gets started by an entrepreneur, someone who wants to have their own business and has some knowledge generally of the government space. They win their first contract. There's a lot of excitement around that. There's an initial revenue stream. The owner or owners start to feel like, oh, we made the right decision in getting into this business. And maybe because of it's a set-aside business, maybe it's because they just write great proposals. Maybe it's just because clients like them and are referring them. Maybe it's because they're developing some good partnerships out in the government contracting world. They see some rapid growth through additional contracts. They've gotten on GSA schedules and things are moving along. It's starting to feel like a real going concern. And then what we see is that companies get to about 10 million up to about 20, 25 million, and things start to settle down and starts to level off. And the owners start to, while they're proud of what they've done and over a 10 or 15-year period, they start to say, well, what do we do now? We may be running out of time as an 8A firm, and we know that we have that 9 years. That may be part of it. And the question is, how are we going to compete now in the full and open world? And so that can seem very, very daunting. And the big question that comes up in every one of these situations is, what are we going to do next to grow the company? So here are some of the ways that owners choose to grow their companies and ascend that, what we're calling the second S curve. And all of these can work and have worked for various companies, and in combination, they can form a very powerful strategy, particularly if it's well thought out, research has been done into the marketplace, and if companies are realistic about their capabilities and what they can do.
And one of the other things that you see in the examples we have here in the slide is there's a lot of different ways to take it to the next level. What I would say is you want to pick the ones that are going to work for your organization. Trying to attack all of them at the same time is probably a recipe for failure.
Yeah. So your strategy should be not a 6-month strategy, but probably a 3 to 5 year strategy. As a business owner or a senior exec in the company, that's the kind of the time frame you want to look at to get up that next S curve. So you may have to do many of these things, or you may decide to do all of these things. But as Glenn said, you got to be patient at the same time. So as we grow, there are going to be a lot of changes to the business, and some of those changes will be quite substantive in how they present themselves. So let's go to the next slide. So your owner, or perhaps you are the owner, selects a path to growth, and let's say it works. You make it up that second S curve, and now the company has gone from, say, 10 million up to 25, 30, maybe even 50 million. Big change. You've gone from maybe 50 to 100 people or 50 to 75 people. Now you got 150 to 250 people. Just that in and of itself speaks to greater complexity. But when you start to make that growth spurt at that level, fundamental changes to the company, and particularly internally with its infrastructure. You've already done the things on the outside, externally, to win more contracts, to figure out how to serve more people and more agencies. That's all positive. But what's often overlooked in the growth strategy is, what are we going to do when we get to be that size? What are going to be the obstacles internally to operating a company that's 30 to 50 million or even up to 100 million? Totally different ball game, right? So what am I talking about? I'm talking about people, the people side, the leadership side. Do we have the leadership team in place that can take us to through this and manage this growth? Do we have the facilities? And I mean, there are things that seem rather tactical, but they become major obstacles if they're not addressed. Facilities, space, number of locations we have to have. Maybe we want a contract in San Diego, or we want one in Huntsville. This changes the way we're going to have to operate the company. HR has to change and generally has to be upgraded and become more sophisticated. Compliance becomes a bigger issue. We're now hitting a radar screen, and DCAA now knows who we are. And then finally, IT, and we're going to talk a bit about this today, but the lifeblood behind the scenes of your company is going to be your financial system and your financial processes. So all of those things need to be addressed.
Bill, the question came in.
Yeah.
Someone says, how do we encourage our CEO to see this and understand this?
Well, that's a big challenge coming from grassroots up. And a lot of companies have advisory boards so that it comes at a peer-to-peer level. Mm-hmm. But it is often very difficult for employees who may be 2 or 3 levels down from the owner. I think the best way is for, and if you are one of the folks who reports to the owner, there's a direct conversation that can be had. If you're 2 levels down or 3 levels down, you have to get to that executive level, right, and start having these conversations and seeing if they start to see it, that, oh, we're plateauing, we need to do something, or we've already made it up the S-curve and we're bursting at the seams in every possible way and we need to invest. I think that's where you have to get to first. The challenge with a lot of business owners is this is their baby. They've had it for 15 or 20 years often. And it's a challenge for them to think about investing in a big way. We're going to talk about this, but investing in a big way in the company at this point. A lot of them have started to make money, a lot of money, mm-hmm, a really good amount of money after years of maybe not making any money. And before starting the company, maybe having a modest salary at some company. And so they're challenged by this conundrum as well. But the idea, and I think the nature of the conversation is not spending, it's investment. We're investing in our future.
Good point.
Yeah. Good question. That takes us to the next slide, which is about investment. So for a lot of companies, this is a whole new way of thinking. And I've walked into clients who have no annual conversation about what they're going to invest in the next year. And a lot of times because they're not investing at all. Some of you may be in businesses that are often termed lifestyle businesses. And it's interesting when we start talking to some lifestyle business owners and they've enjoyed 4 or 5 years, great years, the contracts have come in, everything's getting executed well, and they say, okay, now the future is upon us and we're going to have to do something different. So putting more money back into the business and having a plan for doing that, it should become systematic. And so those of you who start having those conversations internally, hopefully it turns to, we need a process for investment. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're operating on the federal fiscal year or the calendar year, but let's say you operate on the calendar year. That should be a conversation that starts now in the September-October timeframe, and that there's a list of investments that need to be made. Now, those investments might be developing a new solution. It might be hiring the new BD person. But if you're heading up that S-curve, those of you who are in finance and HR particularly are going to start to feel the pinch.
Right.
And I've had clients where the controller, CFO, HR people are getting sick. They're going to hospital. It just gets really bad if there's no foresight into this, because if the tools aren't there in the back office to run the business, it's just as bad as if you haven't hired the people to go out and deliver the business you just sold.
Yeah, another way I like to look at this, looking at this slide that, growth requires investment, is to use an analogy. And, many of us, if we live in a house or a townhouse where we have to make periodic repairs and investments into our home for the long term, that is going to be more effective as we stay in that house. If we defer all the maintenance until the roof is leaking, the cost of repairing a leaking roof is significantly higher than it would have been if we would have done the ongoing little things as they came along. And I think the same thing applies in business as well.
Well, take the metaphor another step. You start out in a townhouse, not a lot of maintenance. Then you move out to where there's grass and you've got a lawn. Maybe there's a pool. There's a driveway you have to take care of.
Yeah.
Trees that have to be pruned, maybe taken down, a roof that has to be replaced. And, you know, that's similar to what happens when a company gets into the $25, $30 million range. It just becomes so much more complex to manage. All right. So complexity, like I said, you go from 50 employees, you're now at 150 to 250 employees, you're heading in that direction. And many of you may be in those back office and very critical positions that keep the company running. You know, whether you're in the contracts, finance, HR, IT support, recruiting, huge area for growth. You've got more clients, you've got more contracts to manage. By the way, when you have more people, you end up with more personnel issues. You know, when you have 15 people to manage, it's one thing.
Yeah.
When you've got 200 and you're a business owner or one of the senior people, you may not even know the 200 anymore. All of a sudden there are issues, and I could go through a slew of examples of personnel issues that my clients go through every day. And they're quality issues. That's another big thing that happens as you grow, is where quality was very manageable at 10 to 15 million or 5 million. You get up to 25, 30, 35 million. All of a sudden, because you got 200 people and you had to bring on so many at one time, now there's some quality issues and clients starting to notice, and it's taking up a lot of time of the owner. They almost feel like they're playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah. And when you look into systems that are a part of this, you know, think of how it reflects on your organization as you're growing and you don't build out the infrastructure. And now you're trying to get that invoice out to the customer, and you have to ask the question sometimes, I've got a deadline to get it out by a certain day, but it's going to take me longer than that deadline. So how do we squeeze the blood out of a turnip, if you may? And do you take the risk of getting it out on time and there may be an error in the invoice?
Yeah.
Or do you take the time that's necessary and get it out correct? I like to think of it sometimes as the organization grows, this beast is almost like a rubber band, and you can keep stretching it and keep stretching it. And if you stretch it too far without investing in supplemental rubber bands around the stretch so you can support it, somewhere along the line it may break, and that's when you can create the problems where the beast becomes too big.
Yeah, it's interesting, this metaphor of feeding the beast, because Glenn and I have been talking about this. We have heard clients use this exact term, business owners who say, I feel like I just get up every morning and feed the beast, and that the beast thrives on the increased complexity of the business. In fact, I was at an event this morning where a business owner who has a $25 million business got up and said the exact same thing. So it's interesting how this expression is getting some traction. But what this all leads to is a tremendous amount of stress in the organization. I think Glenn's analogy here, or the metaphor of the rubber band event, at some point it's going to break. And and clearly it diverts a lot of attention away from the senior folks and others, controllers, HR directors, etc., IT people. They all get their attention diverted away from what they should be doing every day to trying to put their fingers in the dike. So we think, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn, but what we believe here is that infrastructure is such an important component to taming the beast and to relieving that stress in the organization. Glenn?
Thanks, Bill. And so how do you tame the beast? And one of the ways that you can tame the beast is investing in the infrastructure. But what is infrastructure? I mean, is it the pipes, the wiring, the foundation? In our view of infrastructure, and Bill and I have talked about this a number of times, it really involves three areas. It's the people, it's the processes, and the systems. So first, the people. I would venture that here in the DC metropolitan area, the East Coast, the majority of government funded, government contractors are people-based organizations. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is your organization's assets go home every night at 5 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock. But the reality is your assets are your people and you need to invest in them. So what type of investments do you need to make? One, as you're growing your business, it's not just the people that are on the line, working with the client, doing the hard work, the heavy lifting to get the job done, but it's also that underlying foundational layer of the right leadership team, the right management layers, and the right staff in the right seats on the bus. And the beast gets created when we don't have the right people in the right places. We don't have enough of the right people, and people are racing around in a sort of chaotic process trying to whack-a-mole and put out the fires instead of focusing on their business. The second part is processes. So you need processes that are going to scale. If you're a $5 million a year company, there are a lot of things you can do quickly and manually to get things done. If you're a 15, 20, 30, $50 million a year company, you can't keep doing all those manual processes. You need things that will scale. If you're growing your business, what are you doing about recruiting, hiring, onboarding, training, salary management, promotion? Remember, our assets are our people. Our assets, most of the staff, think of their rice bowls, if you may. They're looking at, they love the job they're doing, but a very important part of their job is also the remuneration, the money that they're earning, and making sure that the right promotions are in place, the right training in place so they can move on to the next level, and bringing on new people. You win a new contract and you've got to bring on 50 or 100 new people. So what's your process of doing that? You want to make sure you hire the right people, so you need a process and tools for that. Pipeline management. So you've got some great work today, but the majority of the contracts that are out there have an end date. Of course, you're going to try to rebid and win it for the next round, but you also have to look at the pipeline. What happens if that contract just flat out ends? Then you need something to supplement work for your organization, and you can't wait until the contract ends. You need a pipeline to look at the deal selection, the review. You don't want to go after everything that breathes. You want to go after the deals that make sense for your organization. Financial management and reporting. You got to know where you're at. Which projects are making money? Which projects are losing money? Do you know why? Being able to measure and track the information. Contract and compliance management. We're all working in a type of business that is very, very unique. Government contracting, government funding has compliance as like the underlying requirement that goes through everything. If you are not compliant with all the regulations, and we look at the FAR and the CAS on the commercial side, and for nonprofits, you look at the uniform guidance, those are like thousands of pages long. And there's a lot of words and a lot of ambiguity in many cases in that compliance. You've got to make sure you get it right, and you got to have the right people on board in the processes to ensure that you're compliant. And thirdly, systems. So the three main areas that we see for systems are HR, finance, and CRM. And they all reflect back on those processes. So HR, you need systems in place. Once you get beyond 15, 20 million, $50 million, you need an HR system to track the compliance you need to keep on top of for your HR. You've got your Department of Labor. You might have SCA requirements. All these different complexities you've got to keep on top of. From the finance side, that's our traditional green eye shaded, roll up your sleeves accounting systems, but you need systems in place that can accurately process the transactions for a government contractor, for a government funded organization. It works differently than it does for many other organizations. We have to deal with our unallowables. We have to deal with our indirects and our overheads, our G&As, our direct, and we got to get stuff in the right bucket. And lastly, CRM. CRM is, it's our opportunity management. It's our pipeline. It helps us with our deal selection. If we look back with a good CRM system, to be able to look at what we've won and what we haven't won, and be able to come up with information to help us bid on the next job or the next opportunity, to help us be more productive. And without scalable systems, really the beast is just going to get larger and more ferocious.
Let me add a few things to that, if I may.
Sure.
Having been in some of the larger GovCon consulting firms, and now having worked with quite a number of smaller ones, the maturation of a smaller firm into a mid-sized and finally a larger firm requires it to manage pipeline, to understand what the backlog is overall. And so something called estimate to complete becomes a part of the vernacular.
Mm-hmm.
You start to measure margin and not revenue, because now you've got multiple accounts, maybe multiple sectors you're working in. You got a lot of different people that you have to, whose performance you have to measure. And what you really want out of them as you mature as a company is you want all your people thinking not just about revenue, but thinking about margin and profitability. And so being able to track your pipeline, track your estimate to complete, track your backlog. Think about pipeline and backlog equals, it really enables you to predict your future sales and revenue. How important is that to a growing company? It's absolutely critical. And then to be able to track down to not just on a contract, because what happens with smaller firms to become bigger firms is contracts become accounts, and accounts become relationships, and the firm becomes a brand within the agency. And you want to be able to track that, not just your contract,
right,
on an individual basis. So.
And you raise a really good point there, Bill. In terms of your brand, you want to be seen as the organization that can come in and do the work effectively, efficiently, and within budget. Being the low-cost provider in some industries is really important, but really being the organization that adds value to the agency really has a value, for overstating the term, to a lot of organizations, even though we see in the market space the whole low-cost bidder becoming more and more of a factor. But it is also important that you develop the reputation of being an organization that can complete it under budget. So the infrastructure investment, that's what helps to manage and tame the beast. So we're going to look here real quick at one area of that investment, and that area of investment is your accounting system or your ERP system. So one question that we hear a lot here at RAP when we go out and talk to clients is, hey, will any ERP system support our government contractors? It's just accounting, right? Well, it's sort of yes and no. And the reality is there is no silver bullet for ERP systems. So I know there's a lot of marketing that's out there, and people are on the webinar today, and Bill and I have had a lot of experience as well. There's a number of different systems that are out there. But there is no solution that any agency or any organization that guarantees you compliance with DCAA, FAR, uniform guidance, regulatory. It's the processes, the systems, the reporting tools to maintain that compliance that are critical. So in our line of business as government contractors, federally funded folks, we really require a highly specialized system. My experience is over time, there's a number of systems that are out there that say that they support the government contracting area. I think my experience shows, and Bill and I have talked about this before, there's really 3 or 4 systems that truly live and breathe in the GovCon space. There's lots of systems out there that have a little piece that says, I want to play here. But if you're an organization that lives and breathes in government contracting, and that's what you do every day, you need a system that is as focused on that business as you are. And we've seen that there's really the 3 or 4 systems that are out there. There's none of them are the silver bullet. None of them have all the advantages, and none of them are bad. It's really what system fits within which organization. The real 3 systems that we see rising to the top in our when we're going out and helping organizations select systems, Deltek, Uninet, Janus are the most entrenched in the SMB space. SMB meaning small, medium-sized businesses.
For GovCons.
For GovCons,
right.
Yes. Now, if you're a distribution company and you don't do government contracting, well, that's a whole different story. If you're construction and you're not doing government contracting, again, a whole different story. But each of those systems handles government contracting in a similarly, but also differently.
And I might just say one thing. I mean, we're talking to small, mid-sized companies today, but I've seen in at least 2 instances where large companies, very large, we're talking 500 million in the federal space up to $1 billion or more, have failed miserably by either picking the wrong system or picking a system that was supposed to be for both federal and commercial.
Right.
And basing it on the commercial side of their business, to the point where they could not close their books, to the point where DCAA came in and found such compliance issues that they didn't quite close these businesses down, but there were heavy fines that had to be paid. So this is, you're probably wondering, why are we drilling down to this particular aspect of infrastructure? Because this one carries the most risk, and it also offers the greatest benefit to a smoothly run company.
Absolutely. And one of the keys with that is the system you select, they need to be familiar with the DCAA, the government contracting community, and the government contracting community needs to be familiar with them, because you're going to get audited, and a familiar system tends to be a more effective audit.
Yeah.
You need to allow, if you're going in and implementing a new system or looking at a new system, you need to do a prototype. You need to spend 3 times as much time measuring from cutting. In other words, make sure that your requirements and your design, what you need is lock solid. And also ensure that just because you've always done it this way in the past on whatever system you're moving away from, and you're moving to a new GovCon system, take into consideration the way the new GovCon system works, because their policies, their processes, their workflow may actually work better than the way we've always done it. And you need to look at strategic priorities versus status quo. So as you grow, the financial role becomes more important, and your effective systems allow more C-level strategic planning. And the strategic planning, can be squashed by people that constantly are working outside the system. As an owner, as a senior management person in an organization, you need a single source of truth for the data. You don't want to have a management meeting to talk about the organization and where it's going and having people from different parts of the organization coming in, basing their recommendations on siloed systems that don't talk to one another. So, what will you get out of a GovCon accounting system that QuickBooks doesn't provide? And why do we ask this question? Well, part of the reason we ask this question is we're talking about growth. Organizations or entrepreneurs that start an organization with 2 or 3 employees, or maybe just by themselves, they don't go out the first thing they do and invest in a GovCon solution. 99.9% of entrepreneurs start their organization using QuickBooks. And QuickBooks is a great solution, but it gets to a point where it does not scale. And at that point, when it doesn't scale, it starts to feed the beast. And we want to be able to tame the beast. So if you're in an organization and you're running QuickBooks or systems like that, and you're now looking that you've got to tame that beast and get to a new system, what do you need out of a system that QuickBooks hasn't been able to provide? One of the areas is integrated solutions. So you need solutions that all operate off a single data point, if at all possible. So HR systems, financial systems, CRM. Well, in many cases, people are putting in systems that work really well independently, but may not work as well when they're all tied together. And it's critically important that when you're chasing opportunities or that pipeline can feed into your accounting system. You need to be able to drive dashboards. So we all know that, historically, if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, the way we provided information to senior management is we ran a report. It was printed on white paper. It had a lot of black letters and numbers, and it was multiple pages, and we were really proud that we could get that out, and we gave it to management so they could make decisions. And in the day, it worked. But in the day, that's all we had. Today, management doesn't want all that detailed reporting. They want something that they can take a quick look at, make an instantaneous judgment on where things are trending, maybe ask for more detail, but those dashboards allow them to act quickly with increased insight, efficiency, and flexibility.
Actually, with some business owners, they're so in the weeds every day on all their numbers that a new system offers them, when they see a dashboard for the first time coming out of their own financial system with their own numbers, they say, oh, I can actually operate differently now.
Right.
And you're now leveraging the business owner to go do more valuable things with their time.
Strategic management instead of losing sight of the forest because they're focused on the trees and the weeds.
Right.
And real-time access from everywhere. You really, as an organization grows and you've got people working on contracts that are on site at your agency somewhere, you need to have them with the ability that they can enter their time remotely, that they can do it on their smartphone. If you've got a project manager, they can look up dashboards on their phone or on the internet, and they don't have to be in the office. And there's a lot of other things we could cover, but the next thing we want to talk about is how do you know it's time to replace your legacy system? And here are some quick key indicators. Are you struggling with reporting and analyzing operating data? Like Bill said, in the past, the CEO got this great printout, put him down in the weeds, and that's where they've been used, he or she has been used to working. Now you give them a dashboard and their eyes light up. Wow, I can see it now. Are your people working outside the system to deliver key reports and analytics? And really what I mean by that is, are your people doing all their work in Excel? Excel is not a bad thing, but if Excel is where they're doing the work, that's not a good thing. Excel has a great value to doing some types of what ifs, but you don't want people running the business out of Excel. Are you, again, depending on Excel for managing your indirect rates, books of record, or reporting? And it is amazing how many times I've seen people that are literally putting together their incurred cost submission, their NICRA reports, and they're doing it all in Excel. We had a client a couple of years ago, I obviously won't say who, but they had put together an incurred cost submission, did it all in Excel. They submitted it. They thought it was wonderful. They ended up, it was approved. They started running on it, and then someone realized later that there was what we'll call a fat finger issue in the Excel. They actually got approved with an indirect rate that was substantially lower than what they were actually driving at. So now they're getting, they had a number of cost plus contracts, they're now getting reimbursed at a significantly lower rate than they're actually running their business. And then they had to go through and try to get it amended. You don't want to have to go through that. You want to get it right the first time. So how does your ERP system reduce complexity? So your ERP is really an integrated information system that serves all the departments within an organization. You can see in the slide here, we got purchasing, HR, project management, finance, CRM, development, everything tied together. ERP, as it relates to government contracting systems, there's not many systems that are out there. And in fact, there's only really one that I'm aware of that truly takes GovCon to the ERP perspective, in that it has one system that does all of this. We have a number of systems that are out there that require you to have, I'll call it a siloed HCM system that then throws data, we'll say, over the fence back and forth. Or maybe it has a CRM system. You're trying to tie in Salesforce or Microsoft CRM, and you get part of it integrated, but it's not really integrated. And one of the systems that we've seen do this really, really well is a system called JAMIS, which is unique in that it brings all of this together. But again, whether it's JAMIS or another system you're using, you need to make sure it's the right system for your organization. So again, when we're looking at a system for government contractors, we come back to the point that government contracting is complicated. It's very different. The whole contract, award, grant, life cycle doesn't offer a lot of flexibility. In fact, offers very little flexibility. And the compliance through those steps and the processes is critical. The more your organization and your system can operate within this GovCon life cycle, the more efficient and effective your organization is going to be in this incredibly competitive environment. Slim margins, which is typical in government contracting, require a higher degree of efficiency and ability to run through this process very effectively. So here's an example of how one GovCon system handles the entire life cycle within one system. This is an example of JAMIS Prime. We like it here at RAFA quite a bit, but that doesn't mean if you're running another system, you're in trouble. This is just one example of how the opportunity through the closeout can be handled within one system. And as I mentioned earlier, there is no single GovCon system that is the best. It is important that you get a system that fits into your organization. If you're a GovCon and you're doing some distribution, part of what you do is delivering a product as well as services. You need an effective system that's going to be able to handle that distribution, that inventory, and things of that nature. So not every GovCon is a straight professional services organization. Sometimes we have some bits of a product that are built in here, or building things. So you have to look at your organization and determine which fits in best for you. So we're here at the end of the webinar. We have another question that came in here, and Bill, this I think is engaged to, or directed to you. How do you engage with clients to help them grow? Or maybe I think what they're asking is, how can someone engage with Greenhouse or RAFA to help them through this growth curve? You want to take the first step?
Yeah, the best way to engage is to work to get a meeting with the business owner directly, and we have both a diagnostic just set of interviews and such that where we can go through the organization and help the owner kind of get his or her arms around the degree of complexity and the obstacles to growth. So we generally start with that. We also have something we call core value, which is a very simple tool that is a set of questions, and we can take an executive team through it together to see how they're assessing various individually the readiness for growth. And then we can have a very robust conversation among that group, among the team, because there might be some different views. And and often it's very powerful, because if you have the owner in the room and some of the execs don't see they see bigger obstacles than the owner does. It's a great forum for getting that all out on the table and having it discussed in a safe environment without the owner feeling overly sensitive. So those are a couple of ways, but it all starts with just talking about. It really starts with, where does the owner want to take the business, and we have to get at that first. Usually, where they want to take the business is they want to grow. They either want to grow and leave a legacy, or they want to grow and get to a point where they can sell it either to their employees or to someone else. And that's the first thing we have to understand. We have to understand where they currently are with their business, and where are they in the market? What accounts do they have? What contracts do they have? What solutions do they offer? And then we start to help them build a strategy. But the most important part of that is trying to understand what are the obstacles to getting there and mitigating those obstacles. And I will tell you, the very first smaller business I worked with, because I worked with a lot of big ones, very first piece of advice I ever gave in the small to mid-sized market was, you need a new financial system.
Well, that actually rolls right into the next question that came in here, and that is, how do I know whether my system is working effectively or it's time to replace? And so I can take that one, and you can add in something, Bill. So one of the things that we find happening a lot with our clients is that they don't know whether the system is working effectively or their systems are working effectively. One of the things that we do and we offer to our clients is a needs analysis or an assessment. And when we go in and do these assessments, we like to do them from an agnostic perspective, because there's two reasons for that. One, you're running a system today. It may be just fine for you, but maybe the processes or the people that are running the system are not using it to its fullest extent. So doing an assessment of your system will help to identify where some of that low-hanging fruit is that you could quickly adapt and use your system more effectively. The other thing we could find is maybe there are parts of your system that are bursting at the britches, and maybe it's time to consider a new system. And then part of that question would be, what is the right new system for our organization? And that becomes a needs analysis and a process that you go through. It's not a if you're a $15 million a year government contractor, you need this system. If you're that, you need that. It's really, each organization is designed and runs somewhat differently than the other. And so therefore you need to have someone do an agnostic analysis, not to try to sell you something, but to help you deliver more effective solutions.
Yeah, and there's also the issue of affordability. Some systems can cost more than others, obviously.
Right. And here's another question that came in. We're currently using QuickBooks. At which revenue range would you recommend to migrate to an ERP system? And so the answer to that question is it depends. It really depends on your contract mix. To be honest, the more contracts that you have that are cost plus, cost reimbursement, IDIQ and things like that, the more you need a stronger system to handle that. If you've got combinations, if you've got SCA requirements that you're trying to deal with on those type of contracts.
Well, and also if you've gone from being primarily a one customer company, and all of a sudden you're 5 or 6 or 8 customers, and that's been part of your phenomenal growth story, that degree of complexity may drive you, because the contracts may be all different, the agencies are different, how they interact with you is different, and so having a better system. Another thing I've seen is when the owner's getting frustrated because there are too many mistakes.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of manual stuff in QuickBooks.
Correct.
And so when the number of mistakes is driving the owner crazy, guess who else is going to go crazy? The whole financial staff's going to go crazy because the owner's coming down on the finance staff. And that's a good time to, as a group, owner and finance staff, to sit down and talk about, maybe there's a better way to get this done, because we're killing ourselves in finance and you're not happy as the owner.
Right.
And I've seen that play out. And
so in your question, you sort of said, what's the revenue range? And it varies, but I would say typically organizations if you're a $15 million a year organization and growing, it's time to start looking for a new system.
I agree.
If you're higher than 15 million and you're still in QuickBooks, then that decision is more straightforward. I do see a number of smaller organizations, and we worked with a couple that are, right around 10 million that just happen to have some very, very complicated contracts where they had issues with overseas operations, they had multi-currency, and all of those factors. So a lot depends on the organization itself, but as a sort of rule of thumb, if you're at the $15 million a year size and you're still chugging along at QuickBooks, it's time to start looking.
You bet. For your own sanity.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about sanity here, but it's kind of been an undercurrent that making your investments in your infrastructure is going to help you with your sanity.
Right.
And that's both the people who are going to be running those systems and working with them every day, as well as the people who are out on the line working with customers every day, because they need the best possible information and they need to know what's happening right now. And then they also want that predictive side of it, which you don't get from QuickBooks.
No, that's correct.
How to do your forecasts. It's a whole new capability you need to take on, and the new system helps you with that.
So at this point, we're going to wrap up the webinar. You've got our contact information here on the Q&A page, and we'll leave this up for a little bit. Please reach out to Bill or myself, Glenn Anstead, and if you'd like a copy of this deck, we'd be glad to share it with you. Simply reach out and talk to us, and we'll be glad to share this with us. If you have any questions that you don't want to raise here amongst the larger group, feel free to reach out to us as well. We'd love to sit down and do a one-on-one discussion on how we can help your organization be more effective as a growing government contractor or federally funded organization and rise to the next level.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.